Arcane League of Legends Season 1 is probably the best fantasy TV show that I've seen in many a year. It's really excellent. In this video, I'm going to review the show. I've only seen Season 1 so far, so that's what I'm going to focus on. I absolutely loved this show. I used to play League of Legends back in the day. I haven't played for a long time. So I knew what the game was, and I never really thought of the game as having sort of a great mythology. It seemed like a game, obviously it's a battle arena, and interesting characters. Video game designers always create fantastic characters. It's kind of what they do. But the game never struck me as having deep mythology to it. Guess it did if you read all of the character descriptions and all of the sort of lore behind. And I know a lot of people did, and I know the lore for these games can very quickly sort of burgeon out and become a grand thing. But I never really got into it in that way. But I did enjoy the game. I used to play. I never played any of the characters that are in the show. I always used to play Sona. So that might tell you something about me. I was a healer. I did enjoy the game. And so when this show was announced, I was interested, but I didn't watch, because I don't watch a great deal of television these days. And I know that they did a second season that rounded it off recently, I think just towards the end of last year. So I decided I was going to give it a go, and I'm glad I did, because it is thoroughly excellent. It is really, really good. Yeah, I'm going to give a quick review here. I will get into spoilers. If you haven't seen the show, it gets my full recommendation for what that is worth. But see the show; it's really good. If you like fantasy, and particularly if you like steampunk. I mean, when have we ever had any steampunk fantasy on TV? It's very, very rare. Hen's teeth. So if you're a fan of steampunk, I think that this is going to be right up your alley. But it is a beautifully written show. It really is superb. The writing is fantastic. The characters were always going to be good because, like I say, coming from a video game where character creation is so rich and the characters are so varied, it was always going to have that as a strength. But the writers have really managed to sort of put together a world and built a world around the characters that's really compelling. And like I say, the storytelling is just superb. It's brilliant. And I'll get into that in the second half of this. So what is the show? Well, it's about a world that is divided. It's a duality. It's a world where on the one hand, we have a sort of a shining citadel of order, which is Piltover. And then on the other side, the Undercity, which is kind of like a squalid, poverty-stricken underbelly. So immediately you can see there's a sort of a duality there that's going to lead to conflict. And it's interesting that duality goes all the way down through the story, even to the sort of central villainous character, which is part of the reason I think the writing is so good in this. So on the Piltover side, you've got a world of plenty, a world of riches, but in many ways it's become stagnant. They call themselves the Citadel of Progress and Innovation, looking to tradition rather than looking forward to the sort of innovation that could happen. And that's summed up really in the conflict between Professor Heimerdinger, who is de facto leader of Piltover, and Jace, who is sort of a young up-and-coming inventor who wants to innovate and create new things. I mean, it uses the central sort of metaphor of steampunk in a very interesting way, because it is a city that's become like clockwork. Even the council chamber is depicted as a great gear wheel, with the councillors sat around a giant cog. It's a tyranny. Everything is set in a train. Everything works. It's very sort of beneficial for the people that are there in Piltover. Tyrannies are easy to live in when you're not the one being tyrannised, Yeah, the central sort of metaphor of the steampunk aesthetic is used very interestingly, in that this is a world that it runs on clockwork. It's sterile, it's set in its ways, it's traditional, it's staid. It's order and continuity that has descended into a tyrannical sort of regime, which you see in the stormtroopers. They're called enforcers, but they are stormtroopers essentially. It's very sort of fascistic imagery, one side of the equation. And then on the other side, you've got the Undercity, which is squalid, poverty-stricken. There's narcotics and crime and all of the things that you would associate with that sort of environment. And that's kind of where the main characters originate. In the first episode, we're introduced to the denizens of the Undercity. And there's a similar sort of setup there between two characters who have opposing visions. One is Vander, a man who is striving for peace at any cost. And then you've got Silco, a crime lord who's, striving for liberation and all of the sort of things that come with it. And then you've got the two sisters. We've got Vi, who is the heroine, the sort of protagonist of the story, and her sister Powder. And it's an interesting motif. It's kind of a Cain and Abel sort of thing, where you've got one sister who is followed, she's admired, she's looked up to, a natural leader. The other sister, really by function of her age, is not able to keep up. She's clumsy, she makes mistakes, never seems to be able to do anything right. And she develops a reputation for bringing bad luck to the group. I can sort of sympathise. Being the youngest myself of 8 children, I can sympathise with Powder very much so. It is a kind of a Cain and Abel sort of motif there, where you've got the two siblings, in this case sisters. The cast of characters is rich from top to bottom. So I've mentioned we've got Professor Heimerdinger and Jace, who are sort of in this technological sort of squabble, which ultimately becomes a squabble over the control of Piltover. It's a very gentle sort of a coup, but it is a coup nonetheless. And that's mirrored on the other side with Silco and Vander. Silco, a very dark, malevolent character, and Vander more noble, but both equally misguided. Their power struggle is far more violent. But it's an interesting mirroring of what's going on the other side of the picture. Some of the other characters, we've got Caitlin, who is one of the enforcers. My favourite character. She's an English good girl, what's not to like? But she gets some, she's one of the enforcers, so, police, and she gets an interesting sort of, they manage to contrive an interesting sort of detective mystery for her to sort of unravel and sort of unpick. Good writing, because obviously we as the audience kind of know the mystery ahead of time, but they do manage to contrive an interesting mystery for her to solve. Adding that extra element, the detective sort of story and the unravelling of the mystery, is very welcome. There are also a couple of romances which sort of lighten the story. They're very sweet, and it is quite a dark story, quite a violent story, so the romances do sort of lighten the tone and give things a more hopeful note. The animation is superb. It's really fluid, allows the characters to sort of come to life and allows them to do things that you wouldn't be able to achieve with live action performers. Quite beautiful. I mean, there's many images that you could sort of just take snapshots of the show and just vistas and landscapes and views of Piltover, also the Undercity as well. There's a lot of eye candy in the show. The voice acting is absolutely brilliant. All of the voice acting seems spot on and ideal. The soundtrack's brilliant and really fits the tone of the show. There seems to be an original song in every episode, which feeds the theme of the story of that particular episode, which is interesting. And the theme tune's great. Imagine Dragons, every fantasy writer's favourite band. That's what we do all day. It is a violent show. It's not for children at all. It's a very grown-up show. There's bad language, there's violence, there's gore, there's a lot of death and destruction and mayhem. So even though it is a computer animation, it's definitely not one for the younger viewer. Yeah, it's absolutely superb. I think if you enjoy fantasy, absolutely give it a go. It's well worth your time. I'm going to talk about the story a little bit because, and I'm going to get into spoilers now. So if you haven't seen it, I would recommend you shut the video off and definitely go and watch this show. It's really worth your time. But I'm going to talk about the story because I thought the writing was really superb, and I think the way that the sort of duality of it's not really a duality between good and evil, because there's good and evil on both sides of the equation here. It's not as if Piltover is a shining bastion of greatness and that the Undercity is just a den of thieves. There are good characters on both sides. There are bad characters on both sides, and it's that duality that's interesting. There's sort of everything is in a grey area. Everything is sort of fluid, but it does have a strong morality to it, and I like that. I think that's very good. But I am going to talk about the sort of duality of the sort of setup and how it sort of culminates in a character who I think is going to become an iconic villain character, one of the best villainous character creations in a long, long time. You'll have to excuse my terrible infographics, but so obviously the first sort of level of the duality, and like I say, it's not a good and evil duality, it's more of an order and a chaos. We've got Piltover that stands for order, but it's like I said earlier, it's an order that's sort of stagnated and become almost tyrannical in a sense, because they're fearful of magic. They don't want the chaos that magic has brought to other places. They don't want it to come to Piltover. They want to sort of exclude all of that. And they've got this sort of shining sort of city built up that pushes all of that out. But then you've got the Undercity, which is obviously on the chaotic side of things, as you would expect from somewhere where poverty is rife and where, chaos exudes from it, sort of every alley and every drinking den and every part of the slum. But it's not that simple. And on the Piltover side, you've got a mirroring of the sort of conflict that you've got on the Undercity side. The conflict between essentially Heimerdinger, who's a very ancient, old sort of Yoda type who's been around for centuries and represents tradition, order, wants to hold everything back in a way because he's a traditionalist, wants everyone to be safe and secure, and he realises the dangers of magic. On the other hand, you've got Jace, who's young and upcoming, aspiring, an innovator. He wants new discoveries, he wants advancement to pursue science. And Heimerdinger putting the brakes on science, and he wants to sort of hold that back, which is reflected on the Undercity side with Silco and Vander. Vander is someone who's experienced war, and he's the sort of de facto leader of the lanes in the way that Heimerdinger is the leader of Piltover. I think Silco says to him at one point, you're willing to die for a cause, but you're not willing to fight for a cause. Vander doesn't see that sometimes war has to happen. Some things you have to defend and you have to fight for, and it's a lesson that he learns in the course of the story very brutally. Silco is the other way. He's the individual that wants to push for the Undercity's independence, and he wants to do that by any means necessary. They're equally misguided in a way. The truth, as is often the case, is somewhere in the middle, in the balance, and these two characters, in the same way that Heimerdinger and Jace are opposed in their views, Silco and Vander are the same in opposition on the other side of the scale. And then you've got the mirroring in what they're pursuing, which is in both cases is magic. You've got Jace, who's developing hex tech, the scientific harnessing of magic for the purposes of innovation and progress, orderly pursuit of magic in the sort of the empirical in science and research. And then you've got Silco, who's harvesting the power of magic to create shimmer, which is a narcotic, obviously, but what is more chaotic than a narcotic? Delving into magic through drugs and the dark and more destructive side of what it can do to harness power and control. Another duality that's sort of set up in the world building. And then we get to the two sisters, Powder and Vi. It's here where the sort of focus of the story really lies because, as I say, the Vi is the heroine, Powder the villainess of the story. What happens to them is tragic, and it's a function of the story, obviously, but again, they represent, in many ways, this sort of duality between order and chaos. Both Silco and Vander become father figures to these two girls. Vander is very much the father figure of Vi. There's quite a few scenes where he's instructing her, counselling her, giving her advice. Silco obviously becomes a father figure to Powder and instills in her quite different lessons to the lessons that Vander wants to instill in Vi. The lessons that Vander's trying to teach Vi are ones of responsibility. Maintain the status quo because otherwise people are going to die. And even though we're living in complete poverty and we haven't got anything, it's better to live in poverty and suffering than to die. Which he's kind of got a point. But then Silco has a point as well, which is surely it gets to a point where the suffering is sufficient that you have to fight back and you have to resist, especially when your suffering is the result of a tyranny and you're being subjugated. The correct picture really is somewhere between the two characters. The conflict centres around the fact that they are extreme characters with extreme viewpoints, and truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Where they both tend towards the centre is where they're both correct. So neither of them are... Obviously, Silco is a villainous character. Vander is more of a noble character, but there's good and bad in both of them. And the same is true of Vi and Powder. They're not wholly good, they're not wholly evil. But it's interesting that this sort of duality finds its final sort of manifestation in Jinx. The tragedy that befalls Powder and Vi leads Powder to become the super-villainess Jinx. And she, as a character, embodies this whole order and chaos duality. Powder is, in some ways, is representative of order. Her clockwork contraptions are symbolic representations of Piltover. Piltover being the clockwork utopia. Her contraptions are defensive, they're distractions, they're diversions. But then when the tragedy befalls and Powder becomes consumed by the persona of Jinx, her contraptions become deadly. Bombs and incendiary devices, and, she becomes a murderess. Jinx has a split personality, but she's not a psychopath. She's not a psychopath like, say, the Joker. It's kind of easy to think, she's like a female version of the Joker, but she's not that. The Joker from Batman is, he's a psychopath. He has no emotions. Jinx is totally different. She has more than sufficient. Her emotions are sort of brimming over. You can see it in her animation, in her eyes. Joker has zero empathy. Jinx, in many ways, has too much empathy. She's guilt for what she's done, to the point where she has sort of mannequins of her dead friends in her lair that she talks to. Obviously, she's just as insane as the Joker, but her insanity takes a completely different form. She's, like I say, a split personality. She's got the Powder persona and then the Jinx persona built on top of that. This representation of the Piltover Undercity sort of order chaos duality is manifested in the character of Jinx herself. It's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic storytelling. At the point that we leave her at the end of season 1, she's been written into a pretty irredeemable position. She's killed so many people. She is a murderess, but she is an emblem of the sort of whole duality of which the whole story seems to hang. I'm interested to see what they do in part 2 or season 2, to see if they redeem her in some way or try to redeem her in some way. Because there is obviously, because we knew her as the innocent girl at the beginning of the story, as the viewer, have this sort of need for her to be redeemed in a way, even though she's become, by the end of season 1, irredeemably evil. It'll be interesting for me to see how the writers tackle that, and whether they try to redeem her or whether they sort of just embrace the fact that she's too far gone. And I suspect that they will try to redeem her, but I'm interested to see what they do there. Yeah, this is my take on the story. As I say, it's an interesting duality mirrored in levels all the way down through the story, which is absolutely fascinating to me. So there we have it. That's my take on Arcane Season 1. It's well worth your time, definitely worth a watch. It's on Netflix, it's on streaming. I'm fairly sure it's available on Blu-ray as well. Let me know what you thought of my take. Did I get it right? Did I miss anything? I'm interested to hear your comments. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.